Hi everyone, so right now we will be going over dimension and style. So, dimension is first up, and what we refer to dimension are the three dimensions that a video game can have. First is two-dimensional video games. These games can be viewed from one point, and they often come in two forms, which are side-scrollers and top-down games. Although these games are not mechanically impressive, they are usually visually impressive and often narrative-driven. As you can see, these examples include Mario, Pokemon, and Zelda. Mario at the left is a side-scroller, while Pokemon on the right is a top-down game. 2.5-dimensional games, or isometric games, are two-dimensional games that have an angled camera view to simulate 3D. At the core, this game is 2D, and the reason is because all its assets are indeed 2D, and are not three-dimensional. League of Legends, for example, may look like an isometric game, however all its assets are three-dimensional, and so it's considered a 3D game. Some good examples of an isometric game are Helltaker, which is at the bottom left, and Smashy Road. On the right, you will see assets for some isometric game, and note how even though it looks 3D, it is actually 2D. Now the third type of dimension is three-dimensional, and these games are built using a 3D engine and all assets are all 3D. These games are much more harder to build, which is why you'll see AAA games having large teams to build them, and they usually come in two common forms, which are first person and third person. Some examples are Ghost of Tsushima, which is at the left, Halo, which is at the right, League of Legends, and Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Now moving on to style. Video games can come in a variety of styles, however usually it depends on the developer. Oftentimes game design may also influence the style, so that may help choose what sort of style you may end up with the game in. Now, the most important thing about style is that there is a consistency between the UI and the actual game, which helps with immersion and the impression of the game on the player. Some games with good consistency include Unrailed, Valorant, and Ghost of Tsushima. Unrailed is the game that you see at the bottom, and you can see on the left that the game has a blocky sort of aesthetic, which is transferred to its menu, in which you can see how the words lobby have a little blocky aesthetic to it. In addition, instead of having cursors, the game has you control the characters you will be playing to move around and click on the options, and this is far better than a flat UI with a random cursor. The game Valorant is a tactical shooter game, and usually visual clarity is very important in these games, which is why you can see how the character design and how its very color blockiness makes it an excellent blend between UI and game design. As you can see, the three characters on the left that are in front of the character you're seeing through have three distinct colors, which are light blue, dark blue, and white with little brown parts. This tells you visually that these are three distinct characters with distinct abilities. On the right, you'll see the same thing happen. There is a green person on the left and a dark blue person on the right of the character you're looking through. However, this time, these characters are outlined in red to show that these are enemies that you should be firing at. Now, the following game that has good consistency is Ghost of Tsushima. Usually, open world games have a waypoint to help show where you should be going. However, in Ghost of Tsushima, they've created a system where the waypoint becomes a part of the landscape in the form of the wind. In this game, you can call the wind and have the wind blow you towards your destination, therefore making the game very immersive and very visually comfortable. Now, we're going to talk about inconsistency. Inconsistent graphics can be damaging to immersion, and although it could be used to an artistic effect, it's generally advised that you shouldn't do that since it's very risky. Now, some games that show inconsistency are League of Legends and Call of Duty Black Ops 3 Zombies. For League of Legends, you can see how these two characters, which are in the game, both in the game, can break immersion. You have a character that uses a very old model, such as the one on the left, with a character that is relatively new, such as the one on the right. And having these two characters on the same battlefield helps break the immersion of the game. Now for Call of Duty Black Ops 3 Zombies, this game has an integrated UI system where you purchase perks from a gumball machine. However, at the same time, it's very weird to have a person in a zombie apocalypse be eating gum for power-ups. Now, in conclusion, In conclusion, Dimension has 3 different dimensions, which are 3-dimensional games, 2.5-dimensional games, and 2D games. Please note that 2.5D games mimic 3D but are not actually 3-dimensional in itself, while 3-dimensional games are extremely hard to build and generally you want to have a big team behind it. For style, consistency is the key to having good immersion and visual comfort for a game, while inconsistency may be used as an artistic effect, but generally it's very risky and bad. And that concludes it for dimension and style. And now we're going to move on to color.
Alright, so I'm Kat and I'll be going over color and its uses and theories. So in this section, we will be going over the color wheel and how to use it, how color theory influences perception, emotions, attention, and meanings, color palette and how to make one, and good resources at the very end. So this is the color wheel, and it is probably the most helpful resource for an artist and for basically anyone in general. So how is a color wheel made? Well, you take the first 3 primary colors, this red, yellow, and blue, and then you mix them together to go and make these secondary colors, which are the orange, green, and purple. Now, when you mix one primary color with one secondary color, you make your tertiary colors, and that is how you create a color wheel. Now, these are color harmonies, which are basically foolproof ways of selecting very pretty looking colors, and it's just like, ways to make it look nice. So, one example of a color harmony is the complementary color harmony, in which you select colors directly across each other from the color wheel. Or the analogous color harmony, where you select one color like this main central purple color, and then you select the colors to the left and the right of it as complementary colors. So, the top 3 color harmonies are generally the easiest to use, but, the bottom 3 as well are very pretty color harmonies that I recommend you try all of them. So, color theory can influence perception, invoke emotions, direct attention, and impart meaning. Now, what do I mean by this? So, influence perception. The center rectangle is the same shade of red for all 3 images, but if you notice, the red is very sharp looking against this green background, and the red looks very light when it's against a darker red background. This just goes to show how color is used can influence the perception of colors that you select. Colors can influence emotion. Looking at this chart, there are general colors that emotions are associated with. So, for instance, reds are generally associated with excitement, passion, and danger. Blues with trust, reliability, and coolness, for instance. So, here is an example of emotions. Oh my goodness. Here's an example of emotions influencing perception. I don't know why it picks that up. Whatever. All right, but if you look at this scenery here, right? It looks like, general happy daytime. The warm sun is coming through with, casual cool tone blues in the background. Looks like any other casual spring day. But if we change the colors, suddenly the emotion that this invokes is quite different. So the scenery remains the same. However, the foreground or the midground elements is now this very dark, warm tone black. And the background has a very orangey reddish glow. This adds a very ominous feeling, right? It kind of looks like a forest fire. It looks a bit spooky. Now, if we change the colors once again, everything is now very cool tones, very calming. Even though the mid-ground elements of the trees and the rock, etc. are very dark still, the cool tone blues in the background kind of adds a very mysterious feel to it. And again, you got the warm tone fireflies going through, which adds a little bit of spark, a little bit of happiness coming through, because yellow is kind of associated with happiness. Again, colors influencing emotions. Looking at the character design of sadness and anger in Inside Out, right? If you look at sadness right here, sadness is colored blue and anger is colored red. All right, because blue is very cool, trustworthy, reliable, and red is an angry color. And if we were to swap the colors, suddenly it doesn't make very much sense, right? Because suddenly anger is yellow and sadness is yellow and yellow is a happy color, and anger is blue. And blue is a very cool, calming color. So neither of this makes any sense. So when you're using color in terms of character design and other forms of design in your games, make sure that the emotions the color imparts kind of make sense. Color can be used to direct attention. Colors that contrast against the background stand out, whereas colors that are similar to the background fade away. Looking at these pencils here, the yellow pencil stands out greatly against the gray background, which is why your eyes are instantly drawn to it. This is very well used in game design. This is a screen grab from Dead by Daylight from the killer's perspective. So you see the red hatch marks on the ground, which indicates that basically the blood of an injured player. And the red here indicates where a generator is located. Now, in Dead by Daylight, the killer's job is to go and kill all the players. And generally, players congregate around generators because they want to fix it. So, against this dark green background, your eyes as the killer are instantly drawn to the red blood trails leading to the player and the red generators that the players generally congregate around. In character design, right? Swain from League of Legends. Swain's color palette is very muted, very gray and bland, with some beige, for his skin and his hair. But your eyes are instantly drawn to his red hand. And this is because the red contrasts greatly against the rest of his color palette. Now, this makes sense because in Swain's lore, his hand is a crucial part of, his lore and his gameplay as a whole. Color can impart meaning. Looking at the screen grab from Overwatch, look at the ultimate here, and, the Roadhog arm sticking through, and the username of this Mercy, they're all red, and red indicates enemies. It wouldn't make very much sense to go and color the enemy green, because green is generally associated with allies, right? Looking at the username, Pharah's username, all right, it is blue because Pharah is your ally, right? And then looking over here on the on the right, all the green usernames indicate people that are in your party. So seeing these three heroes, they're all part of your party. Also, in terms of icons, not only are icons used to give meaning to things, but color are as well. So looking at the endorsements that you can give, right, this hand pointing this way, it indicates shot caller. But not only is it the finger icon, the pointing icon, but also it is color-coded orange. Good sportsmanship is, hand holding, but also green. So this goes to show that if you take one look at the icon, not only does the icon indicate what endorsement you received, the color also indicates it as well. Now, again, in terms of color imparting meaning, looking at the screen grab from Valorant, right? Your allies' health bars are in white. But if you look at the Sage and the Omen, they've taken some damage, but their health is not critically low, so their health bar is still white. Now, if you look at this Phoenix's health bar is actually very red. That's because he's on the brink of death. So it draws your eyes to Phoenix's health bar, and it tells you, hey, Phoenix is almost dead. You might want to heal your ally. And again, in terms of color imparting meaning, look at this Raze who just dropped dead. She is color-coded red because she is the enemy Raze. Color could also indicate progression. Looking at the screen grab from Journey. Journey's arc, the way Journey plays out is depending on where you are in the game, the color palette will differ to go tell you which basically like the theme story arcs you're in. So it also can indicate map progression. So looking at a map of Hollow Knight and Ori in the Blind Forest, the different surrounding colors of your environment will indicate where you are, along with other things, right? So for instance, if you look at the map of Ori in the Blind Forest, if you see that your surroundings very orangey, very pinkish, you pretty much know you're around the Spirit Tree. But if your surroundings are more muted, more grays and blues, you might be in Sunken Glades. So not only does, the name tell you you're in Sunken Glades, looking at the colors around you will also indicate where in the map you are. So, how to make a color palette. So, step 1, utilize your color wheel. It is your best friend. Now, secondly, go select a color harmony. So, here are the general color harmonies that you can select from. Let us go with analogous, which basically you select one primary color, and then you pick a couple of corresponding colors. So, if we were to select orange as our primary color, the corresponding colors will be yellow and red, which is how you generate this color harmony right here. Now, once you get the corresponding colors, you can explore this color palette by changing the hue, saturation, and value. And generally, a rule of thumb, you don't want everything to be the same. So you don't want all the colors to have the same saturation or be of the same value. So, general rules of thumbs, limit your color palette. Always start small. Looking at this left image, the color palette is made up of only 3 colors, purple, yellow, and blue. And blend new colors out of your original palette. So if you look at the background, it is this very light blue, and then we blended out 2 lighter, less saturated blue colors from it to make these little cloud-shaped things, the scallop at the bottom. Right? Looking at the right-hand image, this is disgustingly large amounts of color. They're all of the same max saturation. It looks utterly terrible. 10 out of 10, do not recommend doing this. Also, do not use colors in equal amounts. Generally, you want to have one main color, a secondary color that will take about 30% of your color palette, and an accent color that will be about 10%. So looking at all these characters here, there is generally one main color that takes up about 60% of their color palette. And then they have a secondary color, like these purples here, that is about 30% of their color palette, and then an accent color, right? And then look at their modified color palette was created by blending out colors from the original color palette. Also, take into note the fact that the accent color is used to direct the player's eyes to important elements of the character. So these characters look like fighting would, or like the gameplay would be very fighting based. So their weapons is a crucial part of the character's gameplay, which is why their weapons are highlighted in this very bright orangey yellow color. So, color theories in games. Here are just a couple examples of color theories in games. For instance, Limbo has a monochromatic color palette, and Celeste uses a complementary color palette. This goes to show that depending on the game you're making, the color palettes you select are quite important in terms of giving off different color or different vibes, such as, the analogous color palette of Firewatch, all that red. But again, no matter what color harmony you select, you can make a very beautiful game. Also, be consistent with your color palettes. Take a look at these 4 screenshots of Google searches of a game, right? You can pretty much tell off the bat what game is what simply based off the colors. So let us use an example of number 3. I'm sure you can tell by the bluish purplish sky with the little red icons and the reddish brown bricks at the bottom. This is Mario. So here are some great resources for generating color palettes. So let me go over them real quick. All right, so here is color.adobe. If this opens up, on the left-hand side, you can go select your color harmony that you want to apply. So let us select complementary. Now you can literally just click and drag the colors, and then it will generate a color palette for you. And then if you look over here at the right, you can just save it once you like your color palette. Now, colors, literally the most brain-dead way to generate a color palette. I love this site so much. You can go to generate, and you can just hit the spacebar. It will auto-generate a color palette for you. Now, if you find a color you like I like this orange color, okay? We can lock it, bam, to save it, keep generating the color palettes. Once you find one you like, just go and export the color palette, or you can sign in and save it. Last one, I'm not gonna bother pronouncing this, I don't get it wrong, but over here we have the color harmony, so we can go select. Let's see, the triad color harmony. Again, you can kind of click and drag, try to make the color palette right here, and then over here, your color palette will generate on the right-hand side. So these are amazing resources for generating color palettes, and very foolproof as well. And then moving on to shapes.
Hi everyone, my name is Laura, and I'll be presenting on shapes. So I'm going to start off with the impressions of shapes. And what this means is that as people, we kind of have this overall impression of shapes whenever we see them. And so, for example, if we look at a circle, the overall impression that we get from characters that have these are innocence, youth, energy, femininity. And characters with squares are seen as heroic, balanced, stubborn, and static. And then characters with triangles can be seen as somebody with aggression, someone with masculinity, someone with force. And so we can take a look at some pretty intuitive examples. If we look at Kirby, he's made of generally circular shapes, and he's someone who's very youthful and fun and innocent. Wreck-It Ralph is someone who, as you can see, there's a lot of square shapes, making him seem somewhat balanced, but also stubborn and just generally strong. And Maleficent is made up of a lot of triangles, and she can be seen as evil and someone who's a little bit more evil and aggressive. So moving on into how these impressions are formed. So these things aren't something that people learn in school. It's just intuitive. And the reason why it's intuitive is because it's formed from our real life experiences. And based on our sense of touch and comparing textures, we kind of get these impressions on how these shapes are supposed to be and how they're supposed to feel. So for example, if we touch this really, really cute hamster, it's going to be soft and fun and youthful. And so that kind of impression is ingrained in our heads, along with a ball. It's not spiky the way that triangular spikes at the bottom of a shoe may be painful to touch. And as we were kids, when we played with building blocks, you know that if you place a block on top of each other, they're not going to start rolling around the way that a ball would. So we kind of get the sense that blocks are more sturdy and strong. And circles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into each of these shapes a little bit more in detail and in depth. So I'm going to start with circles. And first of all, circles are generally more organic. And another thing to note is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a circle. It could just be the overall arc or curves in a character, and these concepts would still apply. And it's just because of these curves that there is a lack of threat, because there's a lack of hard edges. And once again, we have Kirby. And if we look at these other characters, they're all composed of very just smooth curves that create an overall very innocent and huggable, lovable character. And the next shape we have is squares. And like I mentioned from the building blocks, they're generally immovable, sometimes unexciting and boring, and overall sturdy. So if we look at a building, this building is composed of a whole bunch of squares put together. And we know, based on our experiences, that a building is not going to randomly fall over or start moving frantically. So we can kind of get the sense that characters that implement squares in their overall composure are also going to have similar attributes. So they're not going to be moved around very easily, and they're probably going to be somewhat sturdy and strong. And lastly, we have triangles. So triangles can also point either up or down, kind of as we see here, and this will give a directional angle to look at. So if it's pointing up, like this character up here, which is Lysandra from League of Legends, we kind of get from the overall composition of the picture that she is someone who is powerful because of the way that this triangle is formed, because it has a pretty big foundation compared to the top. And on the flip side, if it's pointing downwards, we can see that there's a smaller foundation, which can give off the sense that it's unstable and dynamic the way that this picture is. And again, triangles can also be seen as stealthy, fast, sneaky, and once again, like I brought up earlier, they can be seen as harmful and dangerous because of spikes, like we can see in Bowser. Something to note is that most characters are not composed of one single shape. They're usually composed of a mixture of shapes, because with this mixture, you can kind of create and implement different impressions and ultimately create an impression that's unique to your own character. And we can take a look at some examples from movies and shows. So in the top, we have Sully and SpongeBob, who have a very rectangular composition from the get-go. Like the overall pose is rectangular, which can give off a sense of sturdiness. But if we look into the details, we can notice that they're actually formed by a lot of different curves. So the way that the curves are made can also give off the impression that they're more friendly and not as harmful. If we look at Po from Kung Fu Panda, his overall pose is also a triangle, but like we see from Sully and SpongeBob, the details kind of give off more of a curved impression, which gives off the sense that he is more friendly and not actually super evil or powerful or anything. And with Stitch, we have a composition made of a lot of circles and arcs, but in the details, we actually have some claws and some teeth that can be seen as more dangerous because they're more triangular or sharp. And on the right side, we have 3 of Disney's villains. And what we can notice about these villains is that they don't really have any resemblance of circles in their overall composure and overall composition. And this kind of leads to a sense of non-innocence, right? Because this is their way of depicting evil villains and evil characters through the use of shapes and character design. So these characters also have somewhat of a hooked nose and triangular features, and all of this contributes to the overall impression that these characters are not the good guys, they're the bad guys, right? And so implementing shapes into your character. And like we saw in Disney's villains, implementing shapes into your character can actually give your viewer a lot of insight into what your character is supposed to be and what kinds of impressions that, like the impressions that your character gives off, can actually play a really big role into your gameplay. And for example, if we want to draw an eye, we can have something that's round or oval to give off a sense of innocence, or something that's more rectangular to be a little bit more jarring, or any other impressions you want to include. Same thing with faces. And if we look at this specific example, we have different types of jawlines, but the same face. And with these different jawlines, we can give off different impressions. So you can get pretty creative with the way that you implement shapes and different types of curves and arcs. But overall, they all play a role. So you definitely want to pay attention to detail. And I know that we covered a lot. Aaron was covering some dimension, Aaron covered both dimension and style, Kat covered color, and I just covered shapes. And I know this lecture was pretty long, but hopefully if we look to this recap, this will help. And thank you for sticking through the lecture. And that's all I have for today.